These days, we are all feeling so overwhelmed and challenged by so many of the things that are going on in the world around us. And for those who are parents, especially parents of young children, the situation may be exacerbated because children are going to be at a much higher pitch. They know things are going on intuitively. They're picking up on things. They're overwhelmed by what's happening as well, because it's not like we can hide it from them. And the goal really as a parent is to be raising healthy, resilient children, which can be very challenging to do in chaotic times. And that is why I am so delighted to be talking today with my friend and colleague, Jess Sherman. She is a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner who specializes in family wellness. And we are going to dive in and talk about raising resilient children. Jess, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, I love talking about this stuff. So we could go on for hours and hours. I'm excited for the conversation.
And so the first thing I really want to ask, because this is something that is really very focused. How did you get into family wellness?
I fell into it a little bit. I actually thought I was going to go into theater production. That was back in my 20s when I was in university and things, but I ended up going into education. And I think now when I look back to it, I actually see some really cool parallels. But because what I really loved in theater was directing and scripting and understanding the insides of people and how people interact and communicate between the actors, but also between the audience and the actors. That's what really fascinated me. And then it took me in this totally different route into education, where I was working with kids. And it was very similar. It was like understanding the dynamics between teacher and kids, between kids and kids, between kids and their learning and the subject. So it's all about relationships, and it was all about these dynamics. And ultimately it was about growth, and it was about expansion, and it was about development. And that's what I loved as a teacher, but it was frustrating because kids were struggling so much. And this was back, I've been doing what I do now for about 15 years. And so this was back then. But I became really fascinated. I was like, we are really good teachers. We have a really good structure. We are doing really cool things with kids. And still they're really struggling. And a lot of them are relying on medication. And I really wanted to dig into that and understand. It's interesting to me now. I didn't want to understand more about teaching techniques. I wanted to understand their body. I wanted to understand how they were receiving instruction. And so I took a sabbatical, and I studied nutrition as my starting point. And I was like, oh my gosh, the physiology, the biology of what's going on inside a child. We don't know any of that as teachers. We don't understand brain development. We don't understand the resources that a body requires in order to receive instruction and learn. And so I was like, okay, I need to go that route now. I need to start helping kids become healthier so that they can become better learners, and they can develop to their fullest capacity. So that took me down this route that I'm doing now. So that's where I got into family wellness education, around helping parents understand their kids and understand how to feed them, understand how to create an environment for them. And so there's a lot of now cross germination between what I did as a teacher, what I do as a nutritionist, and just with the end goal of helping everyone understand each other, parents understand kids, understanding their own development, so that I call it now parenting from the outside in and parenting from the inside out, which is creating an environment around our kids to help them thrive, but also creating a strong internal environment, a strong biology in them, so that they can become the best version of themselves. So that's where I stand now.
And that really sounds so wonderful. I wish that there was more education around that, because I feel like that's certainly not something, we all know kids don't come with an instruction manual, but as parents, that's certainly not something that's addressed in any level unless someone happens to come across a specialist such as yourself to really begin to dive in at that level.
It's really not just, I don't know where it's discussed. Like, because I'm raising 3 boys, I'm a mom too. And certainly as a parent, I was blindsided I was already a nutritionist. I was still blindsided with how hard it was to feed my kids. And then as a teacher also, like we weren't trained. What's really, I dream of a time when like the doctor, the parent, the teacher, like all the people who are on the front line helping kids, the therapists, we're all on the same page and starting with the child in the center and saying, okay, we need to make sure that this child has the capacity, the building blocks that they need in order to do what is being expected of them. So yeah, we need lots of education around it.
Absolutely. And so one of the things that I'm wondering before we dive a little deeper is, can you give us a definition for your perspective on resilience for kids? What does that mean?
Yeah, so my working definition is a resilient child has a strong capacity to bounce back after stress, and not only bounce back to homeostasis or back to balance, but grow from experience, grow from stress. That to me is what we want. And that stress it can be emotional. It can be stuff happening to them and with them and for them and external and relating to their external environment. It can also be internal stress. It can be things like viruses. It can be things like sickness. It can be they get over colds quickly. That's immune resilience is all part of it. And I'd really like to bring those two things together because I don't see them as distinct. If you become, the more physically resilient you are, the more mentally and emotionally resilient you are, and vice versa, because the body is an ecosystem. It's one, we can no longer kind of cut things. We never could, but there's now more of an understanding that the brain and the body work together. So resilience, as you work to support resilience in one area, you automatically help other areas. So that's my definition of resilience, and to grow from stress, to tolerate and move through and grow from stress.
And that's great. Thank you. That really clarifies things a lot. So can we also talk about why and how what we eat can affect both emotional and physical resilience as we're trying to nourish and raise this child?
Yeah. The bottom line is that stress is very nutritionally intensive. Our bodies are remarkable. We have a remarkable capacity to weather stress. But we have amazing ways to work through it. We also have amazing ways at tucking it away and hiding it. When you can think of all of the trauma research around how we store trauma in our cells, we can do that, which is as a protective mechanism. But what we also now know is that eventually that will drive a chronic illness. And so even though we can do it, it's not necessarily in our best interest to do it. So the bottom line with why food matters is because we need nutritional resources in order to activate our stress response in a positive way.
And so when it comes to looking at the different types of foods, one of the challenges many parents run into is children, either for extended periods of time or for short periods of time, develop pickiness habits that then impact our ability to feed them. are there any strategies that you have to help children learn how to nourish themselves, or how to accept that we're trying to nourish them on a deeper level? Because you can say to a kid, oh yes, broccoli is so good for you, all you want. But if they're not going to eat it, they're not going to eat it. Are there ways to try and help them overcome that, or do we just try to hide it in the food for a little while? What are your thoughts about
Yeah,
that?
we can do all those things. Gosh, this is a whole topic in and of itself, but it speaks to this idea of like one of our jobs, our main job. This is what I say to my kids, like my job is to keep you healthy and safe until you can do that yourself. That's the bottom line. Like I want to keep you healthy. I want to keep you safe. I want to construct an environment in which you can grow into your best possible self. That to me is my job as a parent. So if we are going to expect them to take this on at some point themselves, then we have to teach them how to do that. We can't expect them to just know it.
Yeah.
So if we're going to teach them, then we have a little bit of learning to do as parents, because like we were talking about, I don't know, we'll just do it. So I like structures. I like frameworks. So the way I teach it in my roadmap is there are lots of different ways that we nourish our kids. Food is one of them. We also need, they also need sleep. They also need water. They also need to move their bodies. They also need a strong sense of purpose and connection.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the 5 things that I call them the 5 core needs for resilient health. When you have a super picky eater, nourishing food is just one of these 5 things, right? Sometimes we can't start there because their nervous system or their instincts or whatever it is that's driving, sometimes it's yeast in the gut. There are all kinds of drivers of picky eating. Whatever it is, we can't force them to eat. So we can offer nourishing foods, and we can get curious around what is driving this behavior. And while we do that, we can focus on one of the other 5 core nourishment needs. We can teach them about hydration. We can teach them about their sleep. We can work elsewhere. If food is this massive like trigger point that is causing chaos and explosions in the family, then I try to get parents to say, okay, that is definitely worth tackling. And yes, I do like to, you can blend vegetables into your tomato sauce. That is totally fine, because your job is to keep them healthy and they're not making good choices around that. So yes, you can do that. It's not the end goal. Like we want them to eat the broccoli eventually, but they're not going to do that right now. Sometimes we have to find certain ways to get the fundamental nutrients in them. Sometimes it's supplementation, what have you. We focus on these other things because it is important that we are effectively teaching them, hey, your body needs certain things. So that when they get into the teens and the later teens and they feel icky or they have acne or they have PMS or they have what have you, we can go back, be like, okay, which of the 5 needs has fallen off the radar for us? Where can we, because you do have control over this. This isn't just, oh, you were dealt a crappy cards. You do have a certain degree of control over your health. So that's what I really want parents who leave my world to enter my world and leave my world to have a good, solid grasp on, is how do we teach our kids how to take care of themselves? And so that's the framework that I use.
And I really like that because it's guiding, but it's also empowering the kids as you go through those different steps. Like I wish I'd had that when I was raising my kids.
Parents invariably, they're like, oh yeah, how's my hydration? I'm not actually eating. Oh, I'm not actually sleeping. I'm actually addicted to Netflix. And they start to self-reflect as well. And then it becomes a family thing to be like, hey guys, we are going to all up level our health. Where should we start? And we can talk about it. And so I call that creating a culture of nourishment in the family.
Oh, I love that. A culture of nourishment. That's lovely.
Yeah, it's something we talk about. It's something we talk about at the dinner table. It's something we revisit when we're feeling yucky. It's something that we're not always going to do all the things all the time. Yeah. But that's one of the beauties of the body. A resilient body doesn't need all those things all the time. but it will give you a little message. It will send you a little text message when things are falling off the plate, so to speak, and you can revisit.
And I love that it's also, instead of the parent as taskmaster, like you will eat this or you will do this because I'm the parent and I said so. It's about, here's why we want to do this. And you step into that role of educator and advocate rather than that sort of more authoritarian role that many of us grew up with, that phrase, I'm the parent and I said so.
Yeah. And that there certainly are times when kids are in crisis and we have to take the reins and to be like, you are being self-destructive and we need to fix this and change this. So there are times when you have different hats as a parent. But that kind of authoritarian structure really will only work if you have a very strong relationship with your kids.
Mm-hmm.
And so relationship is at the heart of everything that I do. Our kids aren't going to listen to us, aren't going to receive our guidance, aren't going to get curious about what we're doing or how we're modeling unless they trust us. And so that relationship is built on a strong sense of attachment, and some kids have very disorganized attachment, and they, as soon as you say something, they will say the opposite. It's their instinct. And that goes into trauma work, and it goes into some deeper relationship stuff. But yeah, I do think it's important for parents to have their different hats and understand when they can use the authoritarian hat, when they need to be the advocate, when they can be more collaborative with their kids, and some of the language around how to do that.
And I know you also talk about the stress cyclone when it comes to kids and how they get caught up in that. How do we, as we're working through teaching them these 5 pillars and being that guiding force for them, how do we help them unravel that stress cyclone so that they can be calmer and feel safer and more balanced?
Yeah, I started thinking of this just a few years ago as a cyclone because there's so much emphasis on finding the roots, right? What's the root? Is it the gut? Is it the additives? Is it the chemicals? And I was like, man, you know what? It's all of that. But when you say it's all of that, it's like, oh, what? It's all of it. It's really, but it's a cycle. Stress, because the body responds to stress the same way, no matter whether it's from red dye or someone's yelling at you or gluten that you react to, or a gut parasite or something like that. It's a stressor on the body is going to activate the stress response. And stress because the mind and the body talk to each other. So when you're stressed in your mind, you will activate stuff in your gut. You will, we've all experienced the butterflies in the stomach when we're thinking of something stressful. And then we breathe, we calm down our physiology, and the butterflies in the brain start to go away. So it's just, if there's this constant flow of messages, right? So that's how I started thinking about the cyclones. Like you can start from a lot of different places. And that's the beauty of it, right? That's why there's 5 pillars. You can start with anyone you want. Because if water makes sense to you, be like, hey guys, let's get a water bottle and let's start drinking enough water. That's going to start to diffuse the stress cyclone that's cycling in the body. If you decide, we're eating too many processed foods and it's the additives and I'm really getting it, just read Mira's book and I'm like really getting into this, right? Maybe that's where you start, because as you reduce the additives and all of the nasty ingredients, you're going to be calming the stress cyclone. Maybe it's sleep. So this is why I think of it as a cyclone. And instead of it feeling more overwhelming as I have to do all these things, no, it's that you can do all of these things at different times. And as you do, you will be taming the cyclone. And the better you get at it, the more it will just become habit. And the better everybody will feel. And the more noticeable it will be when the cyclone is starting up again, because you've been eating hot dogs for 6 months and nobody's sleeping and everybody's stressed and you just moved and everyone's feeling disconnected. You're like, oh, cyclone. Okay, let's pull it in. that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I also love that it comes back to that concept that you talked about at the top, which is family wellness. So, yes, we're focused on the child, but it's about the family system so that everybody can be healthy. And that in turn supports the child or children at the heart of the family as well.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that really needs to change in the coming years is, and it is changing. We are always starting to move towards, at least in the circles that I run in anyway, I'm more understanding. Like, it's intuitive to parents when they find me and we talk and they're like, yeah, this makes so much sense, that we're not about fixing a child. It's not, there's nothing wrong with your kid. Because I work with very explosive kids and kids who are having trouble at school and kids who have anxiety and kids who are emotionally unstable and flipping out at the littlest thing. You can't extract a child from their environment.
Mm-hmm.
This is something I learned way back when I was a teacher. It's like how we construct the classroom, how we construct our expectations, how we use our language. Kids feel, you said this right at the start, they are very intuitive beings and they feel things almost more than they hear them.
Wow. Yeah. And so this has just been amazing. Like, you've shared so much really good information. I guess my hope is that the work that you're doing spreads and multiplies, that you are like the pond, the stone in the pond that sends out ripples, because this really sounds like something that needs to be incorporated into more schools, more families, just so that we can help raise healthier, more resilient people. I know before we hopped on, you mentioned that you had a little gift, your biology of behavior. Can you share a little bit about what that's about and where we could find that?
Yeah, it's on my website. JessSherman.com is my home base, and then / biology of behavior. It's, you can also just find it on the top tab. It's the masterclass that I recorded that I want every teacher and parent to watch, because it helps you understand where behavior comes from.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that there are a few ideas that underlie our work. And one of them is that behavior always comes from somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't believe that there are misbehaving. Kids respond. They are masters at responding. They have a beautiful stress response. The sole job is to keep them safe. We all do, but I'm talking about kids. So when you start to understand what activates a stress response and what that looks like, then you can start to address a problem child, a child who is not doing what we expect them to do, with some compassion and some understanding. And because our kids co-regulate with us, that makes a huge difference if you can address them with calm and understanding and compassion. So this is the first step to being able to do that, to ground yourself in an understanding that your child is not a bad child. They are having a stress response. And I go through in there the 5 main sources of stress that nobody talks about because they're hidden inside their bodies. And so, yeah, we talk about the external stressors that we can see, and we talk about helping kids adapt to their environment and therapy and those sorts of things, which are great. But there's these internal pieces that I learned all about with functional diagnostic nutrition and nutrition that also activate the stress response. So you can be the greatest parent in the world and creating all the wonderful things. This is where I was as a teacher. I'm like, we are really good teachers. Why are they still struggling, right? These internal stressors need to be dealt with as well.
Wow,
Not
that is fabulous. I will definitely put that link down below so that everybody can connect with you as well as have access to biology of behavior. That sounds amazing.
Thank you.
Jess, thank you so much for being here today. This has been really wonderful, and I just appreciate you coming on to share your knowledge and your wisdom. And obviously, this goes out to everybody who's listening, that we can all take that time to focus on those 5 pillars and help all be more resilient, much less the children that we are hopefully raising or interacting with.
Thanks, Mira. Thanks for your time too.
Yeah, absolutely. Folks, thanks so much for being here and for joining us for today's episode. We will have the links down below in the show notes. And remember, in all you do, make today a healthy day. Bye, folks.